Real frames per second data across 6 games. The 7600X3D trails by 4 to 9% in most titles, but costs $100 or less. We break down cost per frame and when the upgrade matters. We locked both CPUs at stock settings DDR5 6000 CL30 and tested with frame time logging over 20-minute sessions. The 7800X3D leads in every title, but the margin swings from negligible to meaningful depending on engine overhead. Counter-Strike 2 competitive, 7600X3 D387 frames per second AVG, 7800X3 D412 frames per second, 6.5% gap. Cyberpunk 2077. Dogtown. RT Overdrive off. 7600X D138 frames per second. 7800X3 D149 frames per second. 8% gap. Warzone. Urzikstan. 7600X3 D92 frames per second. 7800X3 D187 frames per second, 8.7% gap. Baldur's Gate 3. Act 3 City, 7600X3D 102 frames per second, 7800X3 D11 frames per second, 8.8% gap. Starfield, New Atlantis. 7600X3 D89 frames per second, 7800X3D 91 frames per second. 2.2% gap, Helldivers 2 Drop Mission. 7600X3D 144 frames per second, 7800X3D 150. If the 7600X3D delivers 94% of the performance for 71% of the price, the value proposition looks strong on paper, but cost per frame math reveals the real story. At $249, the 7600X3D costs $1.63 per average frames per second point across our 6-game suite, 152.5 frames per second composite average. The 7800X3D at $349 costs $2.16 per frames per second, 161.7 frames per second composite. That's a 32% premium for 6% more performance. For builders maxing out a $1,100 budget, that often means the difference between an RTX 4060 Ti and a 4070, a GPU upgrade that matters far more than 10 frames per second from the CPU. If your total build is under $1,400, prioritize GPU dollars over. 3 scenarios justify the extra $100. First, if you play CPU-limited competitive shooters at 1080p with a high refresh monitor, that 25 frames per second gap in CS2 or Valorant translates to lower input lag. Second, if you stream while gaming, the 2 extra cores give OBS breathing room without tanking frame time consistency. Third, if you keep builds for 4+ years, the 7800X3D ages better as game engines trend toward more parallel workloads. We also saw the 7800X3D handle shader compilation stutters better in UE5 titles. Fortnite's first drop into a new POI caused a 40 milliseconds frame time spike on the 7600X3D versus 18 milliseconds on the 7800X3D. If you're sensitive to micro-stutter in open-world games, average frames per second tells half the story. We logged 1% and 0.1% lows across all 6 games. The 7800X3D showed 7 to 12% better, 0.1% lows in Cyberpunk, Baldur's Gate 3, and Warzone. The 7600X3D's lows in Starfield and Helldivers 2 matched within margin of error. Translation, in CPU-heavy open-world games, the 7800X3D delivers smoother frame pacing during heavy load spikes. For esports titles where you're already above 200 frames per second, both chips produce indistinguishable frame pacing. The extra cores don't help when the engine can't saturate 6 cores to begin with. If your primary game is CS2, Valorant, or League, save the $100. Neither chip overclocks traditionally because X3D cache operates at fixed voltage. PBO, Precision Boost Overdrive, and Curve Optimizer tuning yield small gains. We tested both with PBO enabled and 25 all-core curve offset. The 7600 X3D gained 3.1% frames per second on average. The 7800 X3D gained 2.8%. The gap between the two chips remained essentially unchanged. RAM tuning matters more. Both CPUs responded well to DDR5 6400 CL30E tuning, gaining 4 to 6% in memory-sensitive games like Baldur's Gate 3 and Starfield. If you're buying either X3D chip, budget for at least DDR5 6000 CL30 kit. GDIC 4800 speeds leave 8 to 10% performance on the table. The 7600 X3D runs 4 to 7 degrees Celsius cooler under load than the 7800 X3D because the 7600 X3D is the value king for builders on $1,200, $1,500 budgets. It delivers 94% of the 7800 X3D's gaming performance at 71% of the cost, letting you allocate more toward GPU or storage. It makes sense if you play a mix of titles, don't stream, and upgrade every 2 to 3 years. Pair it with an RTX 4070 or RX 7800 XT, and you have a balanced 1440p rig. The 7800 X3D justifies its premium if you play CPU-bound competitive shooters at 1080p high refresh, stream regularly, or plan to keep the system for 4+ years. The extra cores smooth out frame time spikes in modern open-world games and give you more multitasking headroom. It's also build your free playbook for any GPU at betterfps.com/optimize.